Have you ever noticed how some people don't just move through the world, but seem to be constantly auditioning times for it? Their life isn't a series of moments. It's a highlight reel waiting to happen. Every coffee is staged. Every conversation is a potential podcast clip. Every minor setback is a plot point in their hero's journey. They don't just have a bad day. They have a Times character arc, asterisk. This isn't about social media. That's just the stage. This is about a deeper, quieter shift. The moment a person stops times experiencing times their own life and starts times producing times it for an invisible audience. Meet Alex. From the outside, Alex is the picture of calibrated success. Not the loud, flashy kind, but the kind that speaks in the quiet language of high performance. Optimized routines, curated friendships, a career built on visible, measurable wins. Alex's life isn't messy. It's times edited, asterisk. He doesn't chase joy, he chases times contentment, asterisk, which is just joy's more presentable, less emotional cousin. A promotion isn't celebrated. It's a times data point, asterisk, proof his system works. A breakup isn't grieved. It's times analyzed, asterisk, mined for lessons to improve the next relationship iteration. Feelings aren't things to be felt. They're metrics to be assessed for their utility. Is this emotion productive? Does it serve the narrative? For years, this felt like strength. It felt like control. It felt like winning. Because when you treat your life as a project, you never have to feel powerless. Anxiety isn't a storm inside you. It's a system error to debug. Loneliness isn't a hollow ache. It's a sign you need to network more efficiently. You are the CEO, the product, and the marketing department of your own existence. And the feedback loop is clean, logical, safe. But a project has a flaw. It exists to be completed, to be times shipped, asterisk. And what happens when you are both the architect and the building? You live in a perpetual state of renovation. There's always another wall to tear down, another feature to add, another layer of polish to apply. You never get to just live times in the house. You're too busy worrying about its resale value, its curb appeal, its reviews from guests you've never even met. Alex called this drive. He called it self-improvement. What he didn't name was the quiet exhaustion of performing a coherent self, 24/7, even for an audience of one. The low-grade panic that comes when you have a perfectly normal, unproductive Sunday and feel deep in your bones like you're falling behind. Behind whom? The ghost version of yourself you're constantly comparing yourself to. The one in the script where every challenge makes you stronger, every ending is a new beginning, and the main character is always, inevitably, asterisk, evolving, asterisk. This is the modern condition we rarely say out loud, asterisk, asterisk. We are being gaslit by our own potential, asterisk, asterisk. We've been sold a story where our worth is tied not to who we are, but to who we are times becoming, asterisk. And becoming is a horizon that never arrives. It just keeps moving, and you have to keep running, turning your present into nothing but fuel for a future that doesn't exist. So Alex ran. He optimized, he iterated, until the day his father had a heart attack. It wasn't a dramatic, movie-style collapse. It was a quiet malfunction, a shortness of breath, a strange pressure, a call from his mother, her voice stripped of all its usual performance, thin and real with a fear that had no metric. And in that moment, holding the phone, Alex's entire internal system crashed. His brain, so adept at running scripts and analyzing data, offered him nothing. No 5-step plan, no insightful reframe, no productive takeaway, just a white, static noise, and beneath it, a raw, animal terror that felt older than language. He had to get on a plane. He had to go home. And for the first time in a decade, Alex was about to enter a room where no one was watching his performance, where the only role left to play was a son, terrified of becoming an orphan. The project was over. The person had to show up. Asterisk, asterisk. End, part 1. Asterisk, asterisk. Part 2. The house didn't look like a set. That was the first thing he noticed. The light in the hallway was the same dull yellow it had always been. The air smelled of old wood and coffee, not of potential. It smelled like a specific, unchanging past. His mother's hug was a collapse of architecture. All the careful posture, the curated strength she presented in their weekly video calls gone. She was just a small woman holding onto her child, her shoulders shaking with a silence more deafening than any sob. And his father, in the hospital bed, was not a character in a redemption arc. He was a tired man, connected to beeping machines, his skin a fragile grey. He looked Times Small, asterisk. Alex stood there, and the script in his head, the one that should have been offering dialogue, stage directions, a meaningful lesson to extract, just scrolled blank. Error code. This is what we don't talk about when we talk about optimization. It builds a self that is brilliant at navigating platforms, but utterly helpless in a hallway. Alex knew how to analyze a quarterly report, but he didn't know how to hold his mother's grocery list without his mind trying to times it. He could run a meeting, but he stood frozen outside his father's hospital room, paralyzed by the sheer, unformattable reality of the moment. What do you say when there is no correct answer? What do you do when there is no productive action? His first instinct was to manage. To project manage the crisis. He made lists. He spoke to doctors in a calm, data-driven tone that felt like a suit of armor. He organized the medication schedule into a color-coded spreadsheet on his phone. It was a way to keep the terror at bay, to build a little app around the abyss. But at 3 a.m., in his childhood bedroom, surrounded by the ghosts of his simpler selves, the app would crash, the silence would rush in, and in that silence, he wasn't an innovator or a high performer. He was just a boy, afraid of the dark in a house that suddenly felt too quiet. Here is the plot twist, the one we never see coming. Asterisk, asterisk. The breakdown of the performance is not the tragedy, it is the invitation. Asterisk, asterisk. One afternoon, his father, weak but awake, gestured for him to sit. He didn't want to talk about treatments or plans. He pointed a shaky finger at the window. "Remember that maple?" he said, his voice a rough whisper. "The one you tried to build a fort in. The branch broke," Alex remembered. He was 9. He'd fallen, not far, but enough to get the wind knocked out of him. His father had been there in an instant, not with panic, but with a steady hand on his back. "Breathe," he'd said, waiting with him on the grass until his lungs remembered how to work. "Just breathe. The tree isn't going anywhere." Sitting there decades later, Alex felt that same knockout blow, but internal, the fall of his own facade. And his father, again, was offering no grand wisdom, no life-altering quote, just a fragment of a shared, fragile past, a reminder that some things just are. Trees break, hearts falter, forts fall. It wasn't a lesson, it was an anchor. In the weeks that followed, Alex unlearned. He didn't times it intentionally. It was a forced dismantling. He learned to sit in a chair for an hour, doing nothing but watching his father sleep. He learned the rhythm of a hospital not as a system to hack, but as a slow, human tide of shifts and meals and vital signs. He learned to hear the things spoken in the gaps between words. The fear in his mother's sigh, the gratitude in his father's weak squeeze. He was not times evolving asterisk. He was times dissolving asterisk. And in the dissolution, something else was emerging. Something quieter, more solid. The person who got on the plane was a sleek, high-functioning machine, terrified of obsolescence. The person who eventually walked back into his own apartment weeks later was simpler. He saw the curated plants, the designer sofa, the vision board. He saw the time-set asterisk. And for the first time, he saw the exhausting, invisible labour of the stagehand, the self he'd been paying to maintain the lights and scenery for a show with no authentic audience. The modern world calls this times burnout asterisk. It pathologizes it. It tells you to take a week off, practice mindfulness, and come back stronger. But this wasn't burnout. This was an asterisk system, override asterisk. Alex had been gaslit by a story of endless becoming. His father's heart had offered a counter-narrative, the story of times being asterisk, of a life measured not in milestones reached, but in moments fully inhabited, in hands held, in silence shared, in a broken fort that was, for one afternoon, a perfect kingdom. He didn't quit his job. He didn't move to a farm. The change wasn't in the set design. It was in the actor. He began to leave small, deliberate pieces of his humanity off script. He'd say, "I don't know," in a meeting. He'd take a walk without a podcast. He'd call his parents not to times check in asterisk, but to hear the mundane details of their day, the squirrel on the feeder, the overdone meatloaf. He stopped curating his life for its resale value and started inhabiting it for its present tense weight. The drive didn't disappear, it recalibrated. It was no longer a frantic sprint toward a phantom future. It became the energy to show up fully for the unoptimizable, messy, precious present. The project of constructing a perfect self was over. The practice of being a person, flawed, fragile, and finally real, had begun. If you recognize that quiet exhaustion, that feeling of being a ghost in your own life, managing the museum of your potential, this is your sign. You are not a product in development. You are not a story awaiting its third act twist. You are a living thing. And sometimes, living things need to stop growing for a while and just root asterisk. The most radical act in a world obsessed with becoming is to simply be right here. In the quiet, unproductive, beautiful mess of now. Your worth is not a horizon. It is the ground beneath your feet. Feel it. You know the feeling. It's not exhaustion. It's something quieter, more precise. It's the feeling of being the last stagehand in an empty theatre. You're not performing anymore. You're not even in the audience. You're just maintaining, paying the electric bill to keep the lights burning over a set where the play ended long ago. You sweep the stage, adjust the gels on the spotlights, polish props that no actor will ever touch again. The work is meticulous, habitual, and utterly devoid of meaning. This was Leo's life. On paper, he was the architect of calm, a sought-after consultant who helped Fortune 500 companies optimize their human ecosystems. He designed wellness programs, facilitated conflict resolution retreats, and authored white papers on psychological safety. He was a master at diagnosing the emotional drains in a workplace and prescribing elegant, logical solutions. He built beautiful, efficient irrigation systems for other people's emotional deserts, and privately, he was parched. His own life had become a case study in impeccable maintenance. His apartment was a monument to mindful curation, neutral tones, ergonomic furniture, air purifiers humming at a frequency meant to soothe the amygdala. His relationships were scheduled, reciprocal, and deeply polite. He mediated his own conflicts before they could even surface, smoothing over any ripple of disappointment or need with the practiced ease of a professional. He wasn't unhappy. He was times-regulated asterisk, a perfectly calibrated system running on the ghost voltage of a feeling he'd disconnected years ago. His clients called him a emotional translator. He could take a CEO's unarticulated anxiety and reframe it as strategic growing pains. He could take a team's simmering resentment and diagram it into a communication workflow breakdown. He gave chaos a name and a flowchart, and people paid him extraordinary sums for it. He believed in the work. He believed that if he could just get the conditions right, the right boundaries, the right feedback loops, the right psychological permissions, then people, including himself, would finally flourish. The problem was, he'd mistaken the blueprint for the building, the irrigation system for the water. The crack came not with a crisis, but with a cancellation. A high-stakes, 3-day executive summit in Switzerland was called off last minute. Leo found himself with a void, a completely unstructured, unbillable, 72-hour stretch. No agenda to optimize, no emotions to translate, no systems to design, just time. Anxiety, sharp and chemical, flooded his veins. This was unprogrammed existence, raw, unmediated life. He did what any good systems architect would do. He tried to schedule his spontaneity. He made a list of enriching activities. He booked a last-minute massage, a tasting menu at a new restaurant, a ticket to a documentary on the Bauhaus movement. He sat through the massage feeling every second tick by, mentally calculating its ROI on his cortisol levels. He ate the exquisite food, analyzing the flavor profiles instead of tasting them. In the dark of the cinema, as the documentary spoke of form following function, a single, unbidden thought broke through his internal commentary. Asterisk. My entire life is a form following a function that no longer exists. Asterisk. The thought was so quiet and so devastating, it felt like a structural failure. He left before the credits. He walked, aimlessly, through parts of the city he never visited. He passed a community garden, a chaotic splash of unruly colour against the grey pavement. An old man was on his knees, not gardening but seemingly just looking. His hands were buried in the soil, not pulling weeds, not planting, just resting there. His face was turned toward the late afternoon sun, eyes closed. He wasn't times doing times anything. He was in a state of pure, unproductive times contact asterisk. Leo stood there, a ghost at the fence. He realized with a jolt that he had no framework for this. He had protocols for burnout, for conflict, for goal setting. He had no category for asterisk communion asterisk, for the act of touching something without trying to improve it. The old man opened his eyes, caught Leo staring, and didn't smile. He simply gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod, as if to say, asterisk, I know. It's strange, isn't it, to just be here. Asterisk. In that moment, Leo understood his own plot twist. He had not been healing people. He had been times managing times them, himself included. He had built a world-class operation for the distribution of emotional band-aids, all while quietly bleeding out from a wound he refused to name, the wound of disconnection. From the dirt, from the sun, from the unoptimized, inefficient, messy experience of being a living animal on a planet that didn't need his flowcharts. The project of his life had been a sophisticated form of gaslighting. He'd been convincing himself and everyone else that the map was the territory, that if he could just control the environment perfectly enough, the feeling of being alive would naturally follow. It was a show with no authentic audience, and he was so tired of paying the light bill. He didn't burn his life down. He didn't quit and become a gardener. He simply stopped maintaining one particular set. He let the first true thing in years rise up, untranslated. He called his sister, and when she asked the habitual, "How are you?" he didn't say optimal or efficient. He said, "I feel like a ghost." The silence on the line was terrified and real. Then she whispered, "Me too." He began to introduce deliberate inefficiencies. He'd sit through a boring meeting and not try to make it productive. He'd just notice the dust motes dancing in a sunbeam. He'd eat a meal and let himself dislike it. He'd feel a surge of irrational anger in traffic, and instead of breathing through it, he'd let it rumble in his chest like summer thunder, a storm that didn't need to be pathologized, just witnessed. He stopped trying to architect his humanity and started allowing it. The drive to fix, to optimize, to translate didn't vanish. It was repurposed. It became the energy to times show up asterisk, not as a consultant to his own existence, but as its inhabitant. To feel the crude, unprocessed texture of life without immediately reaching for the sandpaper. The most profound healing wasn't a system he designed. It was the courage to step off the stage he'd been maintaining, into the dark, quiet, fertile audience of his own unscripted self. If you recognize that quiet maintenance, that expert management of a hollow core, this is your permission. You are not a system to be optimized. You are not a problem awaiting your own elegant solution. You are a living thing. And living things aren't built on blueprints. They grow from contact, messy, unplanned, and real. The most radical act in a world obsessed with peak performance is not to times manage times you experience, but to asterisk have asterisk one. To let your hand touch the dirt, to feel the sun without calculating its vitamin D yield. Your aliveness is not a metric. It is the soil. Feel it. You think you know what a breakdown looks like. You've seen the movies. The screaming match, the shattered glass, the grand, cinematic collapse. But what about the quiet one? The one that happens not with a bang, but with a click. The sound of a man sitting alone in a perfectly clean apartment, realizing he is no longer afraid of the dark, because the dark is honest. The dark doesn't ask him to perform. His name was Leo, and for 42 years, he had been an expert in a very specific field, the architecture of absence. He built a life so seamless, so logically sound, that no one, not his friends, not his partners, certainly not his family, ever thought to check the foundation. They admired the clean lines, the quiet competence, the way he could solve any problem you brought him, with the calm detachment of a surgeon. What they didn't see was the central, organizing principle of his entire being, a belief, forged in childhood and polished to a diamond-hard clarity, that love was a transaction, a reward for usefulness. His role was not to be, but to be times of use asterisk. His father, a man who spoke in spreadsheets and whose affection was a quarterly bonus for good behavior, had taught him this. His mother, whose anxiety was a silent hum in the walls, had confirmed it. Asterisk. Make no waves, cause no worry, and you will be safe. Asterisk. So Leo became a living algorithm. Input, a problem, an emotion, a need. Output, a solution, delivered calmly, with no messy emotional residue. He didn't have relationships. He had service contracts. He was the friend you called at 2 a.m. when your car broke down, who would be there in 20 minutes with jumper cables and no questions asked. He was the partner who remembered your allergies, your mother's birthday, and the exact way you liked your coffee, but who would flinch, physically, if you tried to hold his face and ask, "What are you feeling right now?" Feeling wasn't the point. Function was. The crisis, when it came, was not dramatic. It was a series of small, silent failures in his internal circuitry. It was realizing he felt more connection to the AI chatbot he used to refine his work reports than to the woman sleeping beside him. It was the hollow ping in his chest when a friend called him the most reliable person I know, and he heard, asterisk, "You are a tool." Asterisk. It was the Tuesday evening he stood in his gleaming kitchen, preparing a nutritionally optimal meal, and was ambushed by a memory. He was 7, showing his father a perfect report card. His father had nodded, once, and said, "Good, now you're worth the investment." The love in that sentence was real, and it was conditional. It was a loan he had been paying back, with interest, ever since. That night, Leo didn't cry. He didn't get angry. The algorithm had no protocol for that. He simply shut down. He went to the breaker box in his hallway, and with a calmness that terrified him, he flipped the switch for the living room lights. He sat down in the sudden, perfect dark, and he waited. This was the plot twist. The breakdown was not the end of him. It was the first honest conversation he'd ever had. In the dark, there was no performance to maintain, no problem to solve, no value to prove. There was just the raw, unoptimized data of his own existence, a tightness in his throat, a cold floor under his hands, the sound of his own breath, unmodulated. The darkness wasn't an emptiness. It was a container, and for the first time, something inside him felt held, not managed. He did not emerge from the dark a new man. He did not quit his job or burn his bridges. He simply cancelled a subscription, the one to the exhausting, lifelong service of making himself palatable, useful, and emotionally frictionless. He began to introduce glitches, deliberate, beautiful inefficiencies. When a colleague asked, "How's it going?" he once would have said, "Productive." Now he said, "Heavy." The word hung in the air, awkward and true. He let it. He went to a dinner party and, instead of circulating with helpful refills, he stood by the window and watched the rain. He felt a friend's disappointment when he didn't offer to fix their problem, and he let that disappointment exist without rushing in to resolve it. The most radical change was the silence. He stopped narrating his inner world to make others comfortable. He stopped translating his humanity into bullet points. He discovered that beneath the lifelong project of being times worth it asterisk, there was a person, not a good person or a bad person, just a person, tired, sad, curious, alive. The love he had always sought as a reward for performance. It had been waiting for him in the unconditional dark, not as a transaction, but as a fact. The foundation he'd been afraid didn't exist was there all along, not built by his usefulness, but revealed by his surrender to the simple, terrifying act of being. If you are an architect of your own absence, if you are fluent in the language of service but mute in the language of self, hear this. Your worth is not a conclusion to be reached. It is not a verdict to be earned. It is the premise. The first line of the story, written before you ever performed a single act of usefulness. Stop paying the light bill on a stage where no one is watching the real show. Flip the switch. Sit in the dark with the uncurated, unoptimized truth of you. The love that matters doesn't find you in the glare of your performance. It meets you in the honest, quiet dark, and says the only thing that needs to be said. I see you. You can stop building now. Have you ever felt the quiet, persistent hum of being the one who holds the space? The one who absorbs the chaos, calms the tremors, and makes the world feel safe for everyone else? You are the emotional anchor, the steady hand in the storm. And you learn this role not because you were told, but because you saw, early and clearly, what happened when no one was holding the line. Your first memory of peace wasn't silence. It was the moment a fight ended. The click of a door, the release of a held breath, the way the air itself seemed to soften from a scream to a sigh. You learned that stability wasn't a given. It was a creation, and you became its architect. You became fluent in the subtle signs, the tightening of a jaw, the shift in tone, the specific silence that meant danger. You learned to navigate moods like weather systems, adjusting your own atmosphere to bring the pressure down. Your happiness became a secondary concern, a luxury. The primary mission was always equilibrium. Keep the peace, maintain the calm, absorb the shock so no one else had to feel the tremor. You carried this into every room. In friendships, you were the listener, the one who asked the questions that turned monologues into conversations. In love, you were the safe harbor, the predictable, gentle landing place for partners who were all storm. At work, you were the diffuser, the one who could translate tension into tasks, who could hold a team together not with charisma, but with a quiet, unwavering presence. You were praised for it. You're so easy to be around. You just get me. I don't know what I'd do without you. The words felt like love, and so you kept building the container, stronger, more seamless, more soundproof. You curated your own needs into a small, manageable corner of your being. Your anger was filed away. Your disappointments were rationalized. Your loneliness was a private room you never furnished. Because who were you to be lonely when you were so times needed? The cost was almost invisible. It wasn't burnout. It was a slow, quiet displacement. You became a museum of other people's feelings, while your own sat in storage, unlabeled. You knew everyone's story, but you had forgotten the sound of your own voice when it wasn't asking. And how did that make times you times feel? Then came the glitch. The moment the system failed. For you, it wasn't a dramatic collapse. It was a Tuesday. A partner, one you had spent years soothing, building a world of soft edges for, said to you, "I just don't feel a time spark times anymore. You're just so times steady steady, The word you had built your life around, your offering to the world, was handed back to you as a reason for departure. The very skill you honed to keep love close had become the reason it was leaving. And in that devastating, silent moment after the door closed, you felt it. Not just heartbreak, not just rejection, relief, a terrible, profound, and shocking wave of it. That was the plot twist. The truth your psyche had been protecting you from. You weren't the anchor because you were selfless. You were the anchor because you were terrified of being the ship, of setting your own course, of feeling the wild, unpredictable rock of your own desires and fears. You had mistaken control for love, stability for safety, and usefulness for identity. You thought you were holding others together, but you were using them as a reason to avoid the terrifying, beautiful work of holding times yourself, The partner didn't leave because you were times 2 times steady. They left, unconsciously, because they sensed the life you had buried alive within that steadiness. They were reacting to the absence of your time spark, because you had spent years carefully extinguishing it to keep the peace. The healing didn't begin with a bold declaration. It began with a series of small, quiet acts of treason against your old regime. You let a friend's problem go unsolved. You said, "That sounds really hard," and then you said nothing else. The silence that followed was agonizing. You felt the old wiring scream to times, "Fix it, soothe it, take it on ". You let the scream echo, and you stayed quiet. You felt a surge of irrational anger in traffic, and instead of swallowing it, you said the word aloud, in your car, alone, furious. You named the feeling without acting on it, and it lost some of its power. You spent a whole Saturday doing nothing that was useful. You followed a whim, a curiosity, a faint memory of something you once liked. It felt illicit. It felt like waste. And then, slowly, it began to feel like oxygen. You began to introduce times inefficiency times into your emotional labor. You answered, "How are you?" with "I'm figuring it out," and left the mystery hanging. You discovered that beneath the lifelong project of being the calmest person in the room, there was a person who was sometimes stormy, sometimes silly, often uncertain, and deeply, vibrantly alive. The love you sought as a reward for your emotional service. It was waiting for you in the uncharted territory of your own unmanaged heart. Not as a prize for being good, but as a birthright for being real. If you are the peacekeeper, the absorber, the one who has made a home in the space between other people's conflicts, hear this. Your stability is a gift, but it is not your entirety. Your empathy is a superpower, but it is not a cage. The world will always have a tremor that needs calming, a chaos that needs ordering. You do not have to volunteer for every disaster. You are allowed to let some earthquakes happen. You are allowed to feel the ground shake under your own feet, and to discover that you can tremble and survive, and be loved not for your stillness, but for your aliveness. Stop building fortresses for people who just wanted to see the wild landscape of you. Open the gate. Walk out into the untended field of your own spirit. The peace that matters isn't the silence you create for others. It's the honest, sometimes noisy, wholly yours life you finally make room for. It meets you in the center of your own uncurated heart and says the only thing you ever needed to hear. The storm is over. You can come home to yourself now.